Hello everyone, I'm here at the Nile in Jinja, Uganda. Yes, this is the same exact Nile that we hear about in Pesach, the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the story of our leaving of Egypt. It starts over here in Uganda, it goes through Ethiopia, through South Sudan, all the way through Sudan and Egypt till it gets to the Yam HaTichon, to the Mediterranean. So it starts over here. And what more appropriate thing to talk about on Shabbat HaGadol, the Shabbat before Pesach, the last Shabbat that we were in slavery, than what Pesach is and the mitzvahs of Pesach, the story of our Yetziat Mitzrayim, so we can come prepared to Leil HaSeder. And what better place to do it than on the Nile? We have 3 mitzvot that we need to do on Pesach. The 3 main ones. We have the mitzvah of drinking wine, 4 cups of wine. We have the mitzvah of eating certain things. So we have the mitzvah of eating the matzah. We have mitzvah of eating maror, the bitter herbs. In the time of Bet HaMikdash, we had a mitzvah of eating the Karban Pesach, the sacrifice of the Pesach. And then the last one, it's the biggest one, is we have a mitzvah to tell the story of our people. Now, the story is so important. This is actually the basis of so many things in Judaism. We repeat this every day. Why are we doing this? Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, in memory of that God took us out of Egypt. We do so many things and repeat it so many times. Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, in memory of God taking us out of Egypt. It's so important. It's so much a part of who we are that in the holiest night of the year, we have many holy days of the year, but only one night that is the holiest night of the year. We have 2 things that we do. We tell stories and we encourage to ask questions, because those 2 things are such a basis to our Jewish identity. So we're going to tell the story and ask questions. Now, I have a whole series on how to run a Seder with each part in detail. But there's the most important part of the Haggadah is called Magid, the part that you tell the story. And when you're going through it, part of it is very, very long. And not everybody understands what you're reading. Maybe you're not understanding what you're reading. And therefore, what's really important is to remember that the mitzvah of Leil HaSeder is actually to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. What are we doing in Egypt to begin with? How did God take us out of there? Why did God take us out of there? So, we start out with the story of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our forefathers, and their descendants, Yosef and his brothers. Yosef's brothers sell him into slavery. He gets down to Egypt, works his way up through the ranks. Paro loves him because God loves him. Becomes the advisor to Paro. Becomes, later on, the leader of Egypt. And because of that, when his brothers come down and they're starving to death, and Yosef reveals that it's him, and gives them food and a place to stay, they end up staying in Egypt. And when Paro dies and Yosef dies and there's a new pharaoh, then everything changes. Paro wakes up one morning and says, there's a very big problem that we have over here. These Jews that are living amongst us, they have the best of the land and they're holding so many possessions. If they decide to overthrow the Egyptian empire, we're done. So what did they do? Paro goes out and decides that he is going to enslave the Jews. But how do you enslave the most powerful people of an empire? You trick them. So Paro goes out, and when he goes out, he goes and he starts building. And the Jews see him working, and it says it's not appropriate for a king to be working outside by himself. So they go and they start helping him. And Pharaoh says, I can't thank you enough, thank you so much. He says, do you mind also coming and helping me tomorrow? Of course. Who wouldn't want to come and help the king and have good favor with the king? So they do. This goes on and on. until eventually Pharaoh says, you know what, I'm not feeling so well today. Can you do this by yourself? No problem. We can do a day or two without Pharaoh. We'll continue doing it. Then a few days later, I expect you to be here at 6. If not, there's going to be consequences. The Jews start getting punished for not being there, for showing up late. And slowly, the whole Jewish nation, except the tribe of Levi, was enslaved. And everybody's enslaved, and generations are already going by, and people do not remember what it was not to be enslaved. And they cry out to God and say, God, please set us free. Please let us go. Help us. And God sends his messenger, Moshe, who grew up as a prince of Egypt. His own story, starting with the fact that Pharaoh hears that from his advisors that there will be a Jewish boy born, and he will be the one to lead the Jews out of Egypt. And therefore, Pharaoh decrees that any Jewish boy that was born will be thrown into the Nile. This Nile right behind us. So all of the Jewish boys are being executed, and the Jewish girls are kept alive. And while the Jewish boys are being executed, there's one woman named Yocheved, Moshe's mother, who gives birth to a Jewish boy a few months early. She hides him, puts him on a raft, and sends him out. And when she sends him out, Moshe's sister, Miriam, goes to make sure that everything's okay with him. And she sees that Bat Paro's daughter, Batia, is out on the Nile, and she sees Moshe floating in the river in a basket, and she reaches out and pulls him in. That is what the name Moshe means, Ki min hanahar mishitihu, because I pulled him in from the Nile. And she pulls him in and decides that she's going to raise him. Miriam says, I know a Jewish woman who can nurse the baby for you, as Paro's daughter did not have that capability, as she did not just give birth. So she brings Moshe back to Yocheved, to his mother. She nurses him for a few years and sends him back to Pharaoh's palace. Moshe has his own story going on with the fight with the Egyptian, as he is still Jewish and his Jewish identity is still there. And when he kills this Egyptian and he has to escape because he is now a wanted man, he goes to the land of Midian, modern-day Libya. And while he escapes and he's hiding out over there, he marries, he has children, and he's a shepherd for his father-in-law's sheep. His father-in-law he goes out one day with his father-in-law's sheep, and one of them runs away. And while one of them runs away, Moshe goes and finds it, and this one is tired, so he doesn't make it walk back, and he picks it up and carries it. This is one of the things that God loves about Moshe, is that he really cares for every single one. So he says, I'm going to make you're going to lead the Jews out of Egypt. Moshe sits there and he argues with God. He says, I'm not worthy. This is all happening at the burning bush. Moshe says, I'm not worthy. God tells him, you are exactly who I want. Moshe is going to talk to Pharaoh, and Aaron, his older brother, is coming with him. And they go and they tell Pharaoh, God, the God of the world, the God of the Jews, the God of your slaves, has said, let my people go. And if not, I will turn the Nile into blood. And Pharaoh is unfazed by this until it happens. And once all the water turns into blood, God turns the water into blood, Pharaoh says, okay, I will let them go. But does he let them go? No, he does not let them go. So, the next plague that God brings is frogs. Frogs come out of the Nile. And why is the Nile the first to be hit? And here's something amazing. The Nile is first to be hit because the Nile is an Egyptian god. And even here in Uganda, when I was here when I was here yesterday, the first thing that all the locals told me is they said the Nile has magical powers. It is it's very good for you to drink from the water of the Nile. The Nile here is very, very, very powerful. So even today, even out here in Uganda, there is still very strong beliefs that this Nile is a powerful being and has mystical powers to it. So definitely back in Egypt, they believed in the Nile as a god. So the first thing that God does is he attacks the Nile. Then there are the 8 other plagues, the lice, the wild animals, the dying of cattle, the boils on people's bodies, the locust, the hail, the darkness, and the death of the firstborn sons. And at the last one, Pharaoh says, "Okay, go, get out of here now." And we come and we're going to leave Egypt. And when we're leaving Egypt, we do not have time for our dough to rise, and therefore we eat matzah. And when God takes us out of Egypt, we go and we are walking. We're walking for a few days till eventually we get to the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf. And that is where God splits the sea for us when the Egyptians are coming and chasing after us. And that is the story of the last days of Pesach, the holiday of the last days of Pesach, as we are celebrating that miracle. But this is the story of our Yetziat Mitzrayim. This is the story of how we become a nation. And it's a story that, besides the fact that it is written in the Torah, we tell it generation to generation, father to son. And we say, this is where we started, back here in the Nile, back here in Egypt, as slaves, owned by another. And God took us out with miracles and absolutely destroying their gods, showing them and showing us there's only one true God. And this is why I am celebrating Pesach today and for all generations, to let those know that there's only one God that I serve. Shabbat Shalom, Pesach Kasher V'Samech.